This is the cesium-131 plumes that were released from Fukushima, and this is March 18th, the day that they reached the west coast of North America. On March 17th, public health officials in the counties in California, and I have two letters, one from Sonoma County, north of the Bay Area, and one from Santa Clara County, which is where Stanford is in Silicon Valley. The public health officials released letters to all doctors in those counties telling them not to give American patients who were concerned about radiation exposure iodine tablets. The amount of radiation would be insignificant, and iodine is dangerous for your system. A couple of days after that, San Francisco reported 18,000 times higher levels of radioactive iodine-131 in the drinking water in San Francisco than the EPA standard allows. On March 17th, the same day that those letters went out that prevented the protection of American Californians' thyroids, and thyroid iodine is also in every cell in your body. And since maybe in the last 20 or 30 years, the iodine levels in Americans has dropped 50%. So they are obviously causing nutritional problems in American food. The warning about the danger of iodine being toxic in the body is absolute total baloney, because if you look at the iodine levels in indigenous people who live on seaweed, on the Japanese, their iodine levels are at least 100 times higher. And Americans are already depleted by 50%. So how in the world could the U.S. Surgeon General, who, by the way, wears a military uniform with bars on it because he's a military official, why is American public health under the military? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because when the nuclear weapons program was being developed, they all knew it was absolutely devastating to the public health and to the health of the environment. So the Atomic Energy Commission and the military formed the EPA to hide that truth from the Americans. They started the National Cancer Institute, the National Institutes of Health, and the Centers for Disease Control. So why is the military and the AEC, or now the NRC, running our health agencies? The answer is to protect the nuclear weapons and the nuclear power programs. And they've stopped measuring radiation, radioactive iodine in milk. The Canadian government and the US government said the amount of radiation that will be in our environment is minimal, it's not dangerous to public health, but the Canadian government moved their British Columbia radiation monitoring program from the coast to Kamloops, which is very far inland, and that was to protect their own workers, but also to not have a paper trail on the very high levels of ionizing radiation that was being rained out along the coastal areas and then moving inland. The EPA announced that they had 124 radiation monitoring stations in the US, but they said 24 are broken, and they said we're not measuring any elevated levels, it's all harmless. The Canadian government denied there was any harmful radiation in the environment, and so I called my radiation scientists around the world, and they gave me data from the Norwegian and the German facilities that actually do monitoring in the environment for the partial test ban, for the non-proliferation treaty, to make sure no one is testing weapons illegally. And those are the two best sites that I've seen. This is actually an animated map that shows how the plume moves over 3 days. The one, I think this is an American one, but the German one and the Norwegian one, they've had it the whole time so that anyone anywhere in the world can understand what is really happening and even evacuate. We should have all been evacuated from the West Coast. And this has just gotten worse. Now they're flooding it into the ocean. It's going to get into the ocean currents and be carried around the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. And eventually, in 1 year, it's completely mixed in the whole entire atmosphere of this planet. There's nowhere to hide. There's no way to stop it. There's no way to turn it off. It respects no borders. It respects no socioeconomic class. And it respects no religion. It's a global, universal, equal opportunity killer. And we can't see it. We can't taste it. You can't even measure it in the rain because it's low levels. But as it rains out, every day it accumulates in the environment. And what they're doing is serving us a dose of radiation that will last for thousands of years, that has contaminated all of North America. These are the monitoring, international monitoring stations. This is from a Dutch site, a German site, around the world. And these light up as the radiation is detected, and you can see the date on the right, upper right is changing. So it starts at March 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th. By the 29th, it had even reached Colombia in South America. Now, at the equator is very hot and moist, and air flowing from the poles, the North Pole and the South Pole, towards the equator, heats up and rises at the equator. So it's like a shower curtain that sort of prevents the air, the poisoned air from North America, the northern hemisphere, getting into the southern hemisphere. But eventually, because of all the processes in the dynamic troposphere, it ends up in the southern hemisphere too. Now, tell me if you really believe the government statements that it's harmless and it's a small amount and it's not really going anywhere. It sure is going everywhere, and they know exactly what they're doing, because they've been monitoring radiation since 1945. This is cesium-137, and this is March 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th, 31st, April 1st. Now, if you notice, the eastern part of Canada, let me show you where everything is. This is looking down on the North Pole, on the Arctic. This is the United States, Baja, Mexico, that's Hawaii, this is Canada, and this is the Arctic Ocean, this is Greenland, and this is Iceland. Here is Europe, this is Scandinavia, this is the Mediterranean and North Africa, and this is the Middle East. And if you watch Canada and Washington, D.C. and New York, you will notice that that radiation flows around them. That is because a HAARP high pressure center where the HAARP heats that air up has formed a sort of a barrier or a high pressure to keep the radiation from contaminating that part. This is nothing. That red spot the days before, right after the explosions, were huge. That tongue went of red, very high levels of radiation, reached a third of the way to Hawaii. And if you also look, why is that going out to Hawaii? That's a very strange weather pattern when it's going east from west to east. It also went world. The highest levels of plutonium measured in the world were measured on the Big Island of Hawaii. I'm going to read something from a book called Unless Peace Comes, a scientific forecast of new weapons. This was published in 1968. And I'm reading from the chapter called How to Wreck the Environment. And this is by Dr. Gordon MacDonald, who was a JASON scientist. The JASON scientists are the modern Manhattan Project scientists, and they work for the Pentagon. They're civilians. They are paid by the MITRE Corporation, which was started by MIT scientists. And the military advisor to presidents, his name was Wheeler, Colonel Wheeler, who was murdered on New Year's Eve and found in a trash dump. He also worked for the MITRE Corporation, so he was most definitely involved with HAARP. Someone in the audience asked me to explain the difference between a magnitude 1, a magnitude 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 earthquake is that each magnitude is 1,000 times stronger than the last magnitude. So it's not 1, 2 is twice as strong as 1. It's 2 is 1,000 times stronger. And a magnitude 9 earthquake, the Fukushima earthquake, released the amount of energy that would be released, that's joules or calories, that would be released by 1 million Nagasaki and Hiroshima bombs, and they were about 30 kilotons. So this is a very, very interesting book. Professor MacDonald is Associate Director of the Institute of Geophysics and Planetary Physics at the University of California, Los Angeles. His researches have embraced a remarkable diversity of natural phenomena, and his professional interests are further extended by his participation in national science policy making. He is a member of President Johnson's Science Advisory Committee, and he's the one who developed tectonic warfare. The Fukushima earthquake is an example of it for the HAARP project. This is what HAARP is for: secret war and changing relationships. Deficiencies both in the basic understanding of the physical processes in the environment and in the technology of environmental change make it highly unlikely that environmental modification will be an attractive weapon system in any direct military confrontation in the near future. Man already possesses highly effective tools for destruction. Eventually, however, and eventually is right now, means other than open warfare may be used to secure national advantage. As economic competition among many advanced nations heightens, it may be to a country's advantage to ensure a peaceful, natural environment for itself and a disturbed environment for its competitors. Operations producing such conditions might be carried out covertly. Since nature's great irregularity permits storms, floods, droughts, earthquakes, and tidal waves to be viewed as unusual but not unexpected. Such a secret war need never be declared or even known by the affected populations. It could go on for years with only the security forces involved being aware of it. And I can guarantee you the security forces all collaborate with each other and trade information. The years of drought and storm would be attributed to unkindly nature, and only after a nation was thoroughly drained would an armed takeover be attempted. So perhaps the effects of the Fukushima disaster, which is to weaken and to poison the food sources and water sources in Japan, will allow the U.S. military, with 14 bases in Japan, to take over such a strategic territory. I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen, but that would be something that could happen as a result of Fukushima. And it's really interesting that maybe the last 6 or 8 Japanese prime ministers only lasted 1 year because they were trying to make détente with China. And even the Japanese emperor did the unheard of thing. Maybe a year ago, within the last year, he went to China and officially apologized to the Chinese for the Japanese military takeover and the horrible things they did to China in World War II. My grandfather, Colonel Edwin Joseph McAllister, was commander of supply for the China-Burma campaign in World War II. He went to West Point when Eisenhower was there, and he drove a Jeep from India with the British and U.S. Army over the Himalayas on the Burma Road and the back way into China to push the Japanese out of China.